Hello, it is Angela Isherwood here from I Run Success, and I'm really excited about today's blog post. It's about your first London Marathon. So many people will be receiving their results in the post this week about whether or not you got a ballot place for the 2017 London Marathon. And I've asked a few people to share their stories, and that's what this blog is about. But I thought I'd share my story on a video. So, the London Marathon is such an important event to me, and it's a really strange way how I actually came to run it. So, back in 2008, I was working in the world of finance, and you all know about the financial crisis. So, towards the end of 2008, I lost my job and I was really distraught. My life had crumbled around me, and I decided to take a gap year that I never had been allowed to, and I went to Australia. Basically, there were no jobs, and I was running away. And I did it as an au pair, where I could not have any living expenses, and so I could have this great experience of living and working in Australia. Now, the au pair thing didn't work out, but I did start working for a company that did property investment, so it was an area that I was a bit more comfortable with. And on their website, in my bio, I wrote that I have a goal to run the London Marathon before I turn 25. At the time, I was 23 and living in Australia, and the furthest I'd run had been a half marathon, and my words after that were, I'm never doing that again. So it was a very strange thing to write down. Nonetheless, when I returned to the UK, I got the running bug again, and I started training really hard. And I decided that I would do my first sub 2 hour half marathon. I was running for a charity called Starfish. They support children in South and Southern Africa who are orphaned because of AIDS and HIV. And I had run for them before I went to Australia as well, so I had done a few races for them and probably raised a couple of £1,000s for them at this stage. Now, this year when I got back from Australia, I got a new job relatively quickly. It took about 6 weeks, and I was working in the finance industry again. But late that summer, my dad started going to the doctor because he had been unwell. He'd been struggling to walk uphill. He was getting breathless, and the long of the short of it was that by the end of August, he had a diagnosis of mesothelioma. Now, this was a type of cancer that's caused by asbestos, and it's a really rare type of cancer, but it's very, very slow growing, and the prognosis is very bad. So I had this horrible diagnosis of my father to deal with, and when I didn't get a ballot place in the London Marathon, I thought, why not run for Macmillan? So I contacted Macmillan Cancer Support to see if I could run London Marathon for them, and do it before I turned 25 according to the goal. Now, I didn't get a place with Macmillan. They're a very popular charity, and all their charity places, all of their bond places were gone. So I thought this was it. There was no way I was going to run the London Marathon before I turned 25. But I figured, you know what, let's reframe the goal. I can do a marathon when I'm 25. It doesn't have to be London. So I entered the Berlin Marathon. This took place in September, and back then, about 5 years ago, you could just pay for your entry. So there was no ballot process with Berlin Marathon back then. So I had my marathon entry. It wasn't going to be before I was 25, but it was when I was 25. It was close enough. A few days later, I got an email from Starfish, and they said that for the first year, they had got 10 charity places for the London Marathon, and they'd really like me to have one, but I'd have to raise £2,500. Now, at the time, this was a very high fundraising target for the London Marathon charity places, and I was really unsure I'd be able to do it. We'd just come through a financial crisis, so it wasn't like before when I just asked my mates on the trading floor to donate and they'd just sign over £100. It was completely different. It was a very different time. But I slept on it, and you know what, I knew. I'd written this down when I was working in Australia. I was going to run this London Marathon. So it was it was a very strange time training for my first London Marathon because, understandably, with my dad being so unwell, I was coming home to Colchester every weekend when I was living and working in London. I was coming home to Colchester to help my parents out, and this made doing the long runs incredibly difficult, because where was I going to find the time to do them, as well as travelling to and from London every single weekend? There were times when I would go up to work in London on the Monday morning, so get a very early train, in order to get to work on time. And this was, it was really hard, really hard to do all of this, but I'd had a goal and I was going to do it. The training just was incredibly difficult because of everything else that was going on in my life. But one of my friends from Australia actually told me a great tip in the last few weeks of training, was that when I run the London Marathon, to ensure that I complete it, I've got to dedicate each mile to somebody. Now, a few weeks before the London Marathon, I was at work and I had this phone call from my mum when I was in a meeting, and I was so scared about what that phone call was going to be. It was my grandmother in Nigeria had passed away, and obviously you know where my mind went. I was thinking of my dad. And so this really, really strongly affected me. And so she was one of my miles. But there were also many, many people who meant so much to me on my journey that I dedicated these miles to. And of course, my dad was number 26. Now, my dad was there to watch my first London Marathon. And it's only, getting a bit emotional. It's only a few years later that my sister told me about how he had watched and waited so hard to see me at the halfway point. And when he saw me, he was so pleased, but he was also completely exhausted. So he had to lie down just on the grass by Tower Bridge for half an hour to recompose himself to be able to watch me at the next point. Now, this is just what he was like, and it was just such an incredible memory for me. And I find that the London Marathon, I always go there with emotion. It meant so much for me that my dad could be there to watch me do my first one. And every time I go back, I'm so grateful I have the opportunity to go back now with my Good for Age place, that it's always that special memory. So it's the crowds, it's the noise, but for me, it's that memory of the toughest year of my life, culminating in one of the best experiences in actually completing a marathon. That experience taught me I could do anything, and you completing the London Marathon, it will teach you that too. You get through training in the winter in the UK when you don't know what the weather's going to be, rain, sunshine, wind, whatever. You get to that start line, you hear the crowds, you see the experience. It's really, really special. So, if you get one of those You're In magazines, jump for joy, because you are about to have the journey and the ride of your life. If you want some help with your marathon training, I can help you with that, and I won't burst into tears every single time we have a phone call. But I am open for new clients at the moment, and it is best to start your marathon training early. So, click the link below, and let's get started.